questions that we talk about in our pamphlet is communicating the covenant of marriage and its theological meaning. Most kids, and when we say kids, we're talking about students too. Most people, though, realize that in the church, there is no guarantee when you get married that things are going to go well.
Right.
And so how can a parent, kind of communicate to their kid, like what marriage is really all about in a simple way?
Right. So, the main fallacy that I would say that happens in the church today is we believe that we've told our kids, I was told this, that if you follow the prescriptions of the Bible, you're guaranteed to have a successful marriage, right? So if you date a believer, you walk in purity in your dating life, you wait till marriage, right? You're going to church together, things like that. You're guaranteed to have a successful marriage. But in my time as a pastor, I couldn't tell you how many couples have fallen apart and just are terrible. And they did those things, right? They waited till marriage. They were both believers when they started dating and engaging with one another. Things like that. They do go to church with one another, yet they either have terrible marriages or no marriage at all, right? So one of the things that's important to understand when it comes to expressing the covenant, and we'll explain that in a second, the covenantal marriage of God, is that we as Christians, once again, we understand that our greatest pleasure and desire is to please our Father, right? So when we walk through the things that God has for us, these prescriptions of righteousness, as you could put them, when we're seeking to walk through them, we're not doing them because it guarantees us any particular outcome. We're doing them because God in Himself is worthy. Like, we want to worship Him, we want to serve Him in all that we do. And if your child doesn't really understand that, if they're not on that page, if they're not like, man, God is my treasure, God is my reward, I want to do everything to please Him, then they're not really going to be on the same page when you try to explain to them denying themselves and going against what their body's naturally going to want to go towards, which is not having monogamous covenantal marriages, which are difficult.
Yeah,
really difficult.
If you're a parent and you're talking to your kid as though they're a born-again Christian when they're not born again, that's not a good idea.
Right.
And so it's important to make that point.
That's right. Where again, like, if you're successful in convincing them, it's like, well, congratulations, you created a Pharisee, But if they understand this foundation, then it's okay to move into this idea of, well, what is a covenantal marriage? Which is really quickly, really simply, what a covenant is it's a promise or a vow. That's what we see in the Bible. And we see that God, when He engages in relationships with His people, He does so by covenant, meaning He makes vows with them. He doesn't just say, hey, I'm going to be your God. Great. He goes through an actual type of ceremony with them in which He expresses to them His vows to them, and they're reciprocating vows towards Him. The most famous one is actually the book of Leviticus. Exodus, Leviticus, where God brings Moses up onto Mount Sinai and gives him the 10 Commandments and what we call the Tanakh, the law of the Old Covenant. And in this time, what God is actually doing with them is He's engaging in a marital type vow-related covenantal ceremony with His people to express the type of relationship that they're going to have. That it's not just, God's not just saying to them, hey, I'm in this because I feel like it, or I'm in this because it's convenient, or I've married you because you're worthy. He's expressing to them His vows to protect and honor and cherish His people, to bless them, to encourage them, and their vows to Him to say, we're going to be faithful to you, we're going to be faithful to your commandments, and they engaged in this relationship. And even in the New Testament, we have the same thing. When Jesus is about to die, when He's about to go to the cross, He passes around a cup during the Last Supper, and He says, this is the blood of the new covenant, in my shed blood for you. What He's saying is that this covenant is going to be different. This vow ceremony is going to be very different than the last one. The last one was God vowing to man and man vowing to God. Jesus says this covenant is just me vowing to you in my shed blood, right? I'm showing you how important you are to me through dying for you and entering into that relationship via what I've done, not what you can do. In marriage, what we see is that God wants us to glorify, which means to reflect or to show, reveal His nature. So when we talk about marriage, we're saying that when we enter into relationships with people, they should be on the basis of what we would call vows or covenants that we make with one another. That it's not enough just to say to someone like, hey, I'm never going to leave you, right? But there's actually like a ceremony, and there's actually like witnesses to these vows, and there's actually like a contract that you enter into that reveals consequences if you break the vow. Why? Because naturally we're deceptive, we're dishonest, we don't keep our word. If you notice in the book of Genesis, when God marries Adam and Eve, there's no vows that are traded. The reason why there's no vows that are traded is because when you're dealing with perfect human beings that are not deceptive, that don't break promises, that are completely honest, there's no need for vows. But when you're dealing with human beings that are dishonest, that struggle with keeping their promises, there has to be a vow ceremony to signify the unification between two people. That it's very precious and beautiful in God's eyes. That's the main reason. So we as Christians, we always argue back to the ontology of God, meaning the nature of God. We're not saying we do this because it'll guarantee you an awesome relationship. We're saying we're doing this because it reflects our Maker, and that's our greatest joy. As you quoted from the Westminster Catechism, the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That this reflection of God is the greatest joy a human being could ever enter into.